and welcome to Macros with Mythili, where we take a hard look at all the recent major macroeconomic developments, both in India and overseas. Well, a major development that we haven't heard the last of is a relentless fall in the price of oil. From well over $100 a barrel till as recently as June 2014, prices have fallen to less than $70 a barrel, and they're slated to go even lower. That should be good news for large oil importing countries like India, for whom a fall in the global oil prices confers triple benefits on the fiscal deficit, current account deficit, as well as inflation. So is it time to uncork the bubbly? To answer that and lots more, we've got some of the best brains on the subject for you. We have with us Vikram Mehta, Executive Chairman, Brookings India, and former Chairman, Shell India, Narendra Taneja, National Convener of the BJP Energy Cell, and Vandana, Asia Editorial Director, Platts, who will be joining us from Singapore. Welcome to the show, all three of you. Vikram, if I may start with you, as somebody who's had long experience of the oil sector, a recent issue of The Economist magazine said the economics of the oil sector has changed. Is it the economics that has changed, or is it the politics that has changed?
Well, I don't think the politics has changed as dramatically as the economics. The economics is now very clear. The demand for oil has collapsed almost, and that's been the big surprise. As I think the same article that you're referring to suggested, that demand in 2014 was projected to be 1.4 million barrels a day increment, and in fact this year it will only rise by 700,000 barrels a day. So that is of course the result of a slowdown in China, plateauing if not decline in Europe and in the USA. But over and above that, there is the supply factor. And the most dramatic development is the increase in oil production or oil and gas production in the US. US is today the largest liquids producer in the world, even more so than Saudi Arabia. Over the last 5 years, it's increased its production, domestic production, by 3.5 million barrels a day. There have also been additional discoveries in other parts of the world. And then perhaps not as dramatic, but very significant, OPEC has decided not to play the role of the swing producer anymore. They decided to roll over their production. They are going to defend their market share. So the combination of slowing demand, rising supply, and then there is the paper barrel, the Wall Street speculator that had gone long on price, on oil in the expectation that prices will hold up. Those speculators have also started to now short the commodity. So the combination is the reason why prices have fallen so dramatically. The politics has, however, remains the same. The politics of oil have always been volatile. And today, when you look at the world around you, you find that the Middle East is in trouble. Nigeria is facing a crisis. Venezuela is nearing default. Russia is currently going through one of its worst economic crises. So, you know, one has to ask the question: how long will this decline persist? I think the fundamentals will suggest that it will persist for some time to come, but it would be a big mistake to be complacent. We in India should prepare for the eventuality that prices will one day plateau and then start to rise again. And this is an opportunity for us to address some of the major issues that you have also identified in your opening remarks, such as what should we be doing about energy security, how should we address the issue of subsidies, what should we do to accelerate the harnessing of our indigenous hydrocarbon reserves. So, you know, we have an opportunity, but this opportunity must not be missed.
Absolutely. We've got a wonderful window of opportunity. But Narendra, if I can turn to you, Vikram, as you know, said in the case of oil, there are more questions than answers. But if you were to look at the oil scenario today, would you see the fall in oil prices now as a net positive or a net negative?
Well, it depends. I mean, positive, negative, both in a way, because if the prices, go down further, in short term, of course, it looks like very positive for us in India, since we are a big importer. But at the same time, we know the prices will start going up in about 15 to 16 months from now. And are we kind of in a very organized way using this as a window in order to carry on the required reforms, reforms our taxes, retail sector, E&P and all that. If we use that as a window, then I think it's a positive. If we don't use that as a window, we use it only to raise some raise taxes and enjoy the time, enjoy cheap oil, then of course it's a negative. But my personal opinion, since the 70s, the first time the world of oil is going through massive fundamental changes, massive structural changes. And I think this churning will probably go on for 2 or 3 years, maybe a little more. And out of that will emerge a new international oil order. And OPEC is not going to be the same which is used to be, for instance. OPEC is a divided house. In a way, OPEC is even a broken house. It's the first time we are seeing, for instance, OPEC in such a pathetic condition. Secondly, at the same time, we see that when it comes to Saudi Arabia using oil against Iran, because Saudi Arabia's biggest rival is Iran. On the one hand is targeting shale, at the same time targeting Iran. Little Saudi Arabia, little in this terms of population, playing such an important role. But the question is, can Saudi Arabia really sustain? My answer is no, maybe not beyond 7-8 months. Russia at the same time, over Ukraine or without Ukraine, probably the Western attitude toward Russia would have been the same, as long as Russia was asserting itself and try to become a kind of pole with regard to oil and gas. So I think massive changes, and for us in India, what is important to use that as a window, be a little bit more assertive, try to kind of appropriate a role for ourselves through G20 or some other BRICS and so on. Let's not forget BRICS is a platform, very important platform. You have 2 biggest producers of oil in BRICS as member and 2 biggest importer at the same time. So for us, this is actually, we should be working 28 hours a day, because this window is very short, maybe max 16 to 18 months, and actually go for rationalization of taxes, modernizing our retail and refining sector, and bring about a complete change in the way, for instance, we look at oil in this country.
Absolutely. But at this point, let me just get Vandana into the discussion. Vandana, when it comes to oil, does one need to look very separately at the short term, medium term and long term? And what are the key differentiators in each of these?
Absolutely, Mythili. I think in the short term, a lot of people have come to some conclusions, probably rightly, that prices are headed lower for the time being. The winners and the losers have been sifted through. It's considered a good time, as both Vikram and Narendra point out, for oil importing economies, especially the emerging economies. So a lot of optimism, sanguinity there with regard to China and India could lower oil prices, provide them the necessary tailwinds to get their economic growth going at good rates again. That's the short-term picture. Of course, in the short term, a lot of focus is also being driven on who blinks first. So as prices head towards $60 a barrel, who is going to start closing? We've already discussed a little bit about OPEC's situation and the war. Some people believe OPEC might be forced to come back to the table for an emergency meeting, maybe, if prices continue dropping below 60. Personally, I doubt that. I think OPEC is indeed in a very new era, having taken a very radically different stance this time around, that they are not going to be on the lookout. They don't have the sole responsibility for managing the supply-demand balance. So it looks like the market forces, supply-demand is going to balance the prices. In the medium term and long term, I think there is a perspective there which, unfortunately, because of our obsession, markets' obsession, and even the layperson's obsession with the near term, we tend to neglect, which is what happens when we are in a sustained low oil price environment. Are we cutting back? In fact, we are cutting back E&P, right?
Absolutely.
What effect is this going to have?
We'll come to that a little later in our discussion, because I'm afraid at this point we have to slip into a very short break, but please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the oil scenario. What does it mean for the global economy, Indian economy? What does it mean for the world at large? Vikram, we were talking just before the break about how the entire economics has changed, essentially because of shale supply. At what price does shale oil cease to be economical? If oil prices continue to fall at 40, 50, will we see a lot of the shale production dry up?
There is no one clear answer. The IEA has projected that only 4% of shale production is viable above $80. In other words, anything below $80, and that 4% will have to be cut off. Dan Yergin's Cambridge Energy Associates has said that 80% of shale production is viable between $50 and $65 a barrel. You know, the reason why there's this broad sort of these broad numbers and why people are not absolutely clear about what is the marginal cost of production is because many of the early players in shale came into the market, acquired leases at very low rates. They have established the production facilities. The cost of a well is no more than $1.5 million. The service infrastructure that goes into supporting the wells and the drilling program has been set out. So those producers are probably profitable at any price above 50, 55. Then there are there are other companies who came in at a much later stage. They acquired acreage at the height of the excitement about shale at very high prices. They still have to put in the various the full rig and service infrastructure. For them, the present price must be hurting. I personally don't think that shale production is going to slacken off in the near term. I think that we're going to see continued growth in production out of the U.S. There is, of course, also a lot of shale potential outside the U.S. I mean, China is has huge potential, and then there are other countries that have also identified reserves. So on the supply side, we can see continued downward pressure. The question really is whether the oil companies are going to be able to have, or do they have the investable surplus to actually continue to look for new high-cost reserves of hydrocarbons.
Vikram, can I just interrupt you there and ask Mr. Taneja, yes, on the supply side, maybe we're okay. But what about the demand side? As pressures for climate change, etc., these issues arise, will demand also get crunched, or will we see demand spiraling up further?
Well, I think it's spiraling up further because you see the climate change debate is very important, and of course we all have to seriously listen to the arguments being offered by them. But at the same time, the fact remains that for countries like India and even China, I mean, fossil fuels are probably going to stay the main source of energy for very, very long time to come. In the case of India, oil probably is going to be almost central for next 30, 35, 40 years. Natural gas probably 60 years, 70 years, maybe even more. So I think coal, very, very important for a long time to come. Look at India's energy mix today. I mean, it's roughly 90% is coming from fossil fuels. So I think, is it going to change overnight? No, it's not going to change. You debate, yes, we have to participate, but at the same time, we have to participate in the global debate on climate change, with a lot of more preparation. In the sense, when you go up and look at the atmosphere, for instance, and look at the carbon dioxide, pollutants, and all that, is important to remember that who are actually the biggest contributors. They don't live in this part of the world. They don't live in South Asia. They're somewhere else. They're in the western part of the world. So number one. Number two, at the same time, we want clean air in India. I mean, we want clean air for our people. We want clean air for our children, for our, in order to develop. Development means actually a good development only when you also can provide clean air and good environment. Having said that, at the same time, we have 400 million people without electricity in India. We have 700 million people below energy poverty line, and we have so many people who are still waiting for energy product.
Okay, let me just ask Vandana. Vandana, how do you see the evolving demand-supply mismatch, and what does it mean for renewables? Because if oil prices stay so low, will the importance of renewables completely disappear?
Yeah, so in terms of demand, I don't believe it will continue at the same incline as, let's say, we saw in the run-up to 2008. And the reasons I say that is, if you look at the developed economies, definitely Europe is going to be negative growth rates for the foreseeable future. The US has, it's been a remarkable story this year. Its economic growth has bounced back, but its oil demand has not. If you look at the more developed economies in Asia as well, Japan and Korea, their demand is flatlining to lower. So what that really leaves you with is countries like the BRICS, of course, India and China. But again, one of the major reasons for the pessimism, the bearishness in the markets this year has been moderating growth in these countries as well. Now, partly some of that is, of course, because of the economic slowdown, but also people are increasingly talking about the reduced oil intensity in China. And it's only a matter of time before it comes to India as well. So as the economies shift from manufacturing to more service oriented, we are unlikely to see high single-digit or double-digit oil demand growth rates. My concerns, at least as an observer of the energy industry for these years, is that every time prices go down, these things automatically slide to the back burner. Nobody's thinking of them. So again, as we rejoice, as oil importing countries like India rejoice in the low oil prices, are we making the best use of the savings from the fuel subsidies? But at the same time, are we giving enough attention on energy conservation and energy efficiency? Look at a country like Korea. It actually has a target to reduce its oil consumption by 4.5% between this year and 2017. So that's the way to go, I believe. Now, yes, in India, first and foremost, we need to take energy, we need to take clean energy, we need to take electricity to all the population. But I don't believe it has to happen in a series. You can do it at the same time. Are we paying enough attention to growing public transportation in India? Do we want to put so many millions of new cars on the roads every day? They're going to be jam-packed. Where is the space for it? So I think, being wise about how we use this, the current, benefit that we have from the oil prices, is very important, I think, going forward.
Absolutely. So that's what we'll address in our last segment. How do we kind of make the best use of this opportunity? But I'm afraid on this note, we have to slip into another short break, but please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the implications of the sharp fall in the price of oil. Vandana and I were talking before the break about how we need to make the best use of the small window of opportunity, because one doesn't know how long it will last. So what is your suggestion? How can we in India make the best use of this window of opportunity?
Well, I think one of the best moves in recent months has been to completely do away with the gas oil subsidies, because while that might have seemed a prudent measure to keep inflation in check and to keep the economic growth going, especially after the financial crisis, definitely when prices are low, you also have to keep in mind that you want to unshackle your state-owned refiners, your PSUs, and let them be, and ultimately you have to let them compete on the international arena, when they go out to secure either refined product barrels or crude barrels. And one of the best ways to do that is to let them be efficient, let them make the margins that they need for the investment tomorrow. The other thing I think is, as I said earlier, the renewables sector is it's taking off in India, but in a very small way. So things like that usually in my experience and to my mind, need a lot of government push in the initial years. So if you look at the example of Europe and how renewables took off there, similarly energy efficiency, energy conservation measures, these are not going to be driven by profit-oriented private sector companies. In countries like Japan and Korea, they have come from the government. So what we really need is first and foremost government interest and government attention on these things, and ultimately as the technologies evolve, whether it be for renewables or whether it be for biofuels or for energy efficiency and so on, then the private sector will definitely get in. But in the initial stages, I think a mandate from the government, a push from the government, a will from the government is very critical.
Vikram, Vandana is arguing for a push from the government. Now, as far as government and oil are concerned, it's always good, I think, to keep government out, because it's easy to cut subsidies when prices are falling. But will they have that courage when prices start rising? So what is your general view? Will the government, A, show this resolve when prices rise? B, is it good to get government into the energy sector at all?
Well, the government must intervene in the energy sector, whether we like it or not. In India, that is now a sine qua non for success, you might say. What is the nature of that intervention is the question. Should it be, to just support the public sector? Should it be to actually create a competitive and enabling environment for private sector? There are 3 or 4 things we must bear in mind. I mean, we must, of course, encourage renewables, and we must focus on conservation and efficiency, which has been talked about. But we must not ignore the fact that that despite all our efforts, even with the greatest of efforts, oil, gas and coal are going to be the dominant requirements in our economy for decades to come. So the first thing that the government must do is to create a competitive environment for enhancing exploration. This is not easy, given that most of the exploration budgets will be slashed. So I hope that the government does not, for example, change the production sharing contract from a cost recovery model to a revenue sharing model. Second, I hope that the government does actually take another look at gas prices. I know it's political, but a $5 a million BTU gas price is not going to encourage international investors to look for gas in deep waters or complex geologies. Third, there may well be some very interesting M&A opportunities, acquisition opportunities overseas. It will be a brave and a cash-rich company that actually looks at those opportunities, but here again, taking a counter-cyclical view, our companies should perhaps be encouraged to look for those opportunities. Now, in that context, of course, we should also have a fairly robust approach to energy diplomacy. Many of the countries that are going to suffer from the decline in the price of oil are countries in which our companies have a large investment. Russia, Venezuela, Nigeria. These are countries that are facing huge problems, but these are the countries where, for instance, ONGC has substantive investments. We must be very clear about how we're going to protect our investments. The dividend payments out of those countries are going to get slashed if the price of oil continues to fall. So here we can't just rely on the companies to protect their investments. Government must support the companies. So the point I'm trying to make is, and of course there is the whole issue of regulation and contract sanctity and tax regime, which we have talked about. We can't afford to play ducks and drakes with those sort of issues. There must be contract stability, fiscal stability at all times. But the real point is that at this particular stage, the government must work with the private companies and with their own public companies to create an environment that will encourage investment domestically, that might open up opportunities overseas. And then the last point I make is that we must look at creating the infrastructure in our country. There is no gas pipeline worth its name. There's one state in India which has an integrated gas pipeline, that's Gujarat. Otherwise, beyond that, we have only one interstate or two interstate gas pipeline, one from Andhra Pradesh to Gujarat and the other from Gujarat to UP. The country has to be now, we must look at creating infrastructure, whether it's pipelines, whether it's a smart grid, whether it's transmission systems. Otherwise, this opportunity that's open to us will be lost. So government has a role and it must not forsake that role.
Okay. Narendra, I can turn to you now, because both Vikram as well as Vandana seem to suggest that you can't leave it to the markets. Oil is much too important and government has a significant role. Would you share that view? And does the BJP in particular, since you're associated with the party, also share that view?
Well, you see, in India, for instance, the government has a role. In a country like ours, with so many people, as I said, without energy. Not only below energy poverty, without any source of access to any source of energy. Government has a role, both the central government and also actually the state government. And we should actually decentralize further, in even districts and panchayats to play a role when it comes to solar, renewable energy in particular. So I think, to say that the government should have no role and is no role, I think is probably is too far-fetched. Look at, you have, name one country where government does play an important role in energy. Even the US plays a very important role, the government plays a very important role. The Persian Gulf War I, Gulf War II had a lot to do, for instance, with what energy companies, oil companies in particular, gas companies in particular in the US had to say on that region. So I think governments all over the world, especially in developing countries, play a very important role. But secondly, at the same time, I think it's very important that when the prices are down, that we actually use that on the one hand, modernize our oil and gas sector, but at the same time to stay focused on renewable energy. I think when densely populated country like India, renewable energy is something that we must be focusing on. And in this present government, I know that renewable energy is actually is a very important area, right from the Prime Minister office to the Renewable Energy Ministry. Everyone is really focusing on that.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in this edition of Macros with Mythili. Clearly, government must be there and it's here to stay. But let's not lose our focus on renewables and let's use this short window of opportunity to make the best of it. Thank you so much, Vikram, Narendra, as well as Vandana, for joining me in this very stimulating discussion. Thank you also for watching. We'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.